Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Talking About the Big Stuff podcast with Michael Cole. Today, I have a special guest with me. My wife, Sarah, is here.
Hello.
So, I thought that for this episode, we would talk about marriage since we are married. We've been married 8 years.
In September.
Yep, it'll be a little more than 2 weeks and till our 8 year anniversary. And I thought that this was a good time for us to record, especially our son is at his first day of school, and we took the day off to see him off to school, and so it was a good day for us to record because we won't have him coming in, even though he really, really wants to interrupt the podcast. Every time I'm editing, he comes in and he does one of those horn noises, bam, 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 and he says, "Did I interrupt your podcast?" And I'm like, "I'm editing, so no, you didn't," because I don't record with him in the house. All right, so let's dive right in. So one of the reasons I thought that we would talk about marriage today is I don't think I think we're both happy with our marriage, but I don't think that either of us is particularly traditional in our thoughts on marriage. So I thought that would be interesting for listeners.
Yeah.
Um, going before we got married, what were your thoughts on marriage?
I definitely thought that after we got married, our relationship would somehow feel different. That's one of the big things that since we got married, I think, you know, you may have a little bit more commitment towards each other, but, your day to day relationship really doesn't change at all. Um, I never felt like the need to get married, but, for the right person, I was definitely interested in marriage.
Yeah, and then you settled for me.
Yeah.
Um, I I was probably the one who pushed for marriage harder before we got married. I always wanted as a kid to be married. I had like pretty much only successful marriages as role models, and so I just thought that's what you did. Um, and so I remember at some point after we got engaged, before maybe after we got married, but definitely after we got engaged, you said if we had never gotten engaged, we would be living life basically the exact same way
Yeah.
that we are. I don't know that I believed that then. Um, I think that I believe that now. Um, the the
We
only
also dated for a decent amount of time before we got engaged.
Yeah, we
And
were
then we were
almost
almost
two.
together for 4 years before we were married.
Yeah, we dated for almost 2.5 years before we got engaged, and then we were engaged for about a year and a half before we got married. So we had been together almost 4 years when we got married.
Yeah.
Um, I think the only big difference, we moved in after we got engaged, so that was a big change, more so than marriage. That was, like when we got engaged, we graduated college a couple months later, and then I moved in 3 weeks after graduation. And I think that was a bigger that was the biggest change until Logan came along, I think. Um, but
Yeah.
I think that you when I agree with the idea that we would basically be in the same spot we're in right now. The one difference is I think that our families accept everything because we're married. Um, in our individual interactions, I don't think that it changes things that much. But I think that when we're, you're able to go on vacation with me, with my family, and I don't know if we had had a kid and weren't married, if that would be. I don't know. I have no idea where we would be in that regard. I know that they would not be happy if we had had a kid before getting married, but that was a big deal before. It's less of a big deal to me now, I guess, which is easy to say once you're married, but
Right. I would say another thing, maybe that played into me not, needing to feel rushed to get engaged was, I was pretty young. Like
yeah.
when we met, I was 22 and then got engaged at 24. So I was still,
Yeah.
somewhat young to be getting married. And
Yeah. I remember. So we got married 2 days after Sarah's 26th birthday, and she already had the job she has now when we got married. Um, but I remember. I don't remember if you had insurance on your own at that point.
Yeah, I did.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say because I remember being like, because we hadn't
Because we
really.
were actually in that bracket where they changed it to 26 after we had already had to come off when we were, I think, 21 or no
Uh,
longer a student. Do you remember that? The law changed.
yeah, I remember that because I was about 3 or 4 weeks shy of turning 26 when the law changed, but I'm 4 years older, so I didn't know if that ever affected you.
Yeah.
Because I don't remember. I mean, that's the nice thing about being together so long is that I literally don't remember. It feels like trying to remember some rule from when you're a child. Like I don't have
Yeah.
any memory of it. So, how much has your view changed? You know, obviously it changed. Or obviously, you had one set of thoughts on marriage beforehand. Now that we've been married, I'd say long enough that it's not a whim
Hmm.
anymore. So, like, I feel like we've settled into some stuff. I feel like people take it seriously after a certain period of time. Other people take our now that we're at that point, what do you think about marriage as a whole, as an institution?
I would say that the biggest way my mind has changed is just that when you're going through difficult times, I think it gives you more reason to work through those issues. Um, I think you know you realize like you have a foundation that you've built, and it's worth kind of like making sure that you're communicating and not letting issues kind of linger and not be addressed until they turn into bigger things.
Yeah,
um I think if you have kids and that really changes it as well. Obviously then kind of gives like the same
yeah,
circumstances as marriage, where you're going to be willing to put in maybe more work than you would if you were just still dating.
yeah. That's true. Also, we moved. I mean, again, we were married and we had a kid already when we did this, but we moved from Massachusetts to North Carolina. I think a large jump like that is scary. When you're not married, it's a bit
Yeah, it could
it's a
be
bit more of a leap.
isolating
Yeah,
when you get to a new place. um
it's more of a leap of
yeah.
faith, I guess, in the other person. I mean, we got lucky with this move that we were smart enough to know that we could go home when we could go to Massachusetts when we wanted to see people. Like that was part of the reason we moved here and so instead of somewhere further, and so we got lucky with that. But I think you know I don't know that in my 30s I would have moved 700 miles from my family without being married for another person.
Yeah,
I did, I had done that in my 20s and it didn't work out great, and so there was that. But
I
and
think it makes it a situation where if you're moving for someone else when things aren't going right again, like
yeah,
it's easy to blame that person. They're the reason why I'm here.
right,
If you're not enjoying it, I think we really have loved North Carolina since we've been here.
yeah.
But definitely, you
Well,
go
and
through spells where, you know, you maybe second guess and think like, oh, I moved away from family.
yeah,
You miss them.
yeah. I mean, we've been here almost 5.5 years. It's long enough that I feel like we know that we like it here for real.
Hmm.
Um, every time that you and I have discussed the possibility of moving back, and just as a disclaimer to any family members that might be listening to this, it isn't going to happen. Um,
Well, never say never. I'm
never,
not hoping for it, but I'm just saying, like, you
never.
don't know what will happen in
But what I
life.
what I was gonna say is, every time we've discussed it, it has been in regards to somebody's health, a family member being sick, or approaching that stage of life where do we want to spend more time,
I
um,
think too,
and selfishly
Logan,
I've said no to
yeah,
everything.
that's true. But also like Logan growing up with his cousins, he really loves them all, and um,
Yeah,
he gets really excited to see them.
yeah. But he also likes that I'm relatively happy person, so that happens here and
That's
doesn't
true.
happen in Massachusetts.
There's less stress here.
Yeah, yeah, and just seasonal depression and stuff. But that's a different podcast episode. Um, so one thing I wanted to bring up, and I did not prep you for, so that I could get your honest thought on, was so there's like kind of a meme right now about wives watching true crime and listening to true crime, and specifically I think it's a lot of murder mystery stuff, like true crime murder mystery stuff, and you don't really get into that. And so my question for you on the record is that because you're happy and you don't think about murdering me, or is that so that you don't have a paper trail when you eventually do murder me?
I would say that I'm someone who, maybe fortunately and unfortunately, when I watch, scary movies and stuff like that, like, I enjoy them, and I think I used to like the thrill of them when I was in my 20s, but I don't like interrupting my sleep.
That's true.
And so I think that those type of, podcasts and things, and I have listened to some of them. I think like the mystery part of it's definitely interesting. I'm forgetting the show now, but there was a show that we were watching on I think Apple TV,
The one with
that
the blind woman.
with the guy from Father of the Bride.
Steve Martin.
Yeah.
The only murders in this house. Only
Yeah.
murders in this building.
And I guess
Hulu.
we haven't really fully gotten through it, so I can't say this for sure, but that's kind of like my happy medium of like it's
A comedic
more
murder
playful
mystery.
and fun than like gory.
Yeah.
So that's the reasoning why it doesn't really
No,
it doesn't really have to do with you.
I just thought it was funny because it's like a big thing right now on, we see all these Instagram reels and memes and stuff about wives watching it, and you
Yeah,
don't.
the real life stuff like really scares me. I don't know why. I just
Good.
yeah.
Good. I'm glad that you don't want to murder me.
Yeah.
Yet. Or
Yeah.
right at the moment, I should say. Maybe not yet isn't the right word,
Yeah.
but at the moment.
I will say that I think as time goes on, you definitely learn how to work together a lot easier than it was in the beginning.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, but we're also
we're in a good.
we've both grown a lot. I mean, we've been together 12 years now, almost.
Yeah.
And you were in your early 20s, I was in my mid 20s, and now I'm in my late 30s, and you're almost in your mid 30s, and we're just more mature when we're not being overwhelmed, at least by constant noise. I guess the next question would be, what do you think is the most important aspect of marriage? Or maybe what's the most important aspect to keep a good marriage?
I think finding interests that you both like, whether it be something as simple as like going for hikes or going on, adventures or traveling.
Yeah.
And also having some interests that are your own.
Right.
So that, I don't think anyone can be your all.
I agree. I think we have a good balance. Because we do spend a lot of time together compared to, I think, a lot of other couples. And I mean that in a good way, not in a complaining way. But we also, like, once a week, you take Logan and disappear so I can record this. And, you go on girls' weekends and I go on guys' weekends. And so I think we have a good balance, especially, on the average weekend, we're in the car together for at least 5 or 6 hours, and Logan kind of ignores us, and so I think it's just you and me basically a lot of the time.
Yep. The other thing I'd say is definitely communication. I know that just sounds like buzzwordy or what everybody says, but I think, saying what you actually mean in the moment when something's bothering you, not just, it may be like loading or unloading the dishwasher, but, usually there's something else behind it or something else that bothered you that day, and just not letting those turn into big things.
So let's get into the I guess the structure of marriage a bit. So like, well, I guess let's start off with one of the big things that I think you and I have been on the same page about since the beginning, but it's something that like when I'm talking to friends and stuff that aren't married who are talking about getting married is like one of the big questions I ask people is like, do you want to get married or do you want to have a wedding? And I think that like there is a good amount of people who want a wedding, and I think ultimately like for me the wedding was fun. I liked our wedding a lot, but when I think about the wedding, you're not replaceable in that equation. It was you, and then let's figure out the wedding, not let's figure out the wedding and then chuck in the person that fills in
Yeah.
the silhouette across the aisle from you.
Right.
Um, and I think that we've, I think that we all know, reality shows, Instagram, stuff like that. You see enough people where you're like, do you want to be married or did you want to throw a really fancy party where you get to be a princess? And I was really glad that you weren't like that. I didn't feel like that at any point. And I remember saying to you a couple times during the like planning process, like if you had like not like a threat, like just kind of like an observation, but like if you had been one of those people who was like what do they call it, bridezilla,
Yeah.
I would have walked, and I would have had no second thoughts about walking because like I couldn't deal with that. But part of the reason why I decided I think to marry you was because I knew you wouldn't be like that.
Yeah. I would say part of that, for me at least, was like I don't love being the center of attention.
Yeah, that's true.
So I didn't like it wasn't like a
That's why she decided agreed to can't come on my podcast was because she loves being the center of attention.
yeah. Definitely.
No, this was just like when I was having everybody on. I think you said something before I asked you. I
Yeah,
can't
like
remember.
jokingly.
Yeah, I feel like
I
for
do
one.
like it. I just don't like listening back to it.
Yeah. Well, you don't have to listen to this episode.
Yeah,
You could just hit play so that it counts as a play and then turn the volume down.
that's true.
Not that that's what I do every week. Actually, I end up listening to each of these like 4 or 5 times while I'm editing and everything else. But
Yeah. I think one of the things about the wedding that I maybe didn't appreciate as much back then, but I do now is, with the pandemic and everything and not being able to see family as much as you wanted to. I think, it, I think for anyone who's getting married or will be getting married in the future, I think don't underestimate like how that is a special day where literally everybody who supports you and loves you is there and
yeah,
hopefully will be there for you.
yeah,
Um,
and don't forget to eat. That is
right.
that is
And
my
make sure you invite friends as well as family. I think
yeah,
that's, sometimes people are like, oh, they try to maybe not invite as many friends because they need to invite all the family. And as much as you can, invite everybody that you want there.
yeah.
Because,
My words of wisdom that I tell after I get through the do you want a marriage or do you want a wedding speech to people. My second words of wisdom when they've decided upon getting married is make sure you eat. I said it to Wes 2 weeks ago. It's literally like what I say to everybody, and um, I feel like you told me this, but the person that coordinated everything at our venue said that she has never seen a groom or bride, but I think I did it more than you did, eat every single bite of food that was put at their place
yeah, I was
until
like
me.
too nervous to eat.
I was not.
Again, not wanting to be the center of attention,
Yeah.
it felt like.
I was like, I remember being mid like conversation with people at a table, seeing that they were bringing out the next course and being like, "I'll be right
I
back."
do remember that. You being like, I'll be right back as we're going around to all the tables.
Yeah, yeah. Food plays a heavy role in not only in our wedding, but I think in our marriage, where you know that if I'm grumpy, it's time to feed me,
Yeah.
or time to stop so that I can eat, or whatever. And I think I'm the living embodiment of the Snickers commercial. And Sarah, before or right around the time we were getting married, used to say that to me all the time, like, you need a Snickers.
Yes.
I guess my next question for you is like, what so when you're not sure, when we're in I mean, we haven't had too many situations that I can think of, but like when you're in a situation where you need a role model or advice, who do you look at or go to as far as marriage role model and marriage advice?
That's a good question.
For me, it's two separate answers
Okay.
because like I look at my parents' marriage as the role model, but I don't go to my parents because I think, and you and I are both pretty good about this. We don't talk
Yeah.
about problems with our families because we know that our families are going to take our sides. I mean, my dad probably wouldn't.
Yeah.
He's pretty honest. He's like me in that way, but you do kind of paint a picture of your spouse, and it's like, yeah, they said a crappy thing to me, I said a crappy thing to them, and now, like, if I tell that story to my parents, she looks like a monster, or if you tell your parents, I look like a monster. And so we've kind of been really smart about that. So I do look at
Right.
them as the person, the couple to look at as a role model, but I legitimately can't think of anything that I've ever gone and asked my parents about, unless it's like not something that's going to paint, like when you were having,
Yeah, I don't think I ever really got marriage advice.
yeah. But I'm saying, like, if I if you like, I guess the person I probably call is Adam or Pat
Yeah.
if I need, like, I don't know what to do. And I guess most of our stuff that doesn't come up very often because most of our stuff that I would ever call or ask people about is the more medical stuff when like Logan was born, and so that I wouldn't think twice about asking my family about because that's not really marriage stuff. That's life stuff more so.
Right.
So I guess it doesn't come up. But like if we were having like a fight, the person that I would contact would be Adam or Pat. I wouldn't be family, and also because Adam and Pat 100% would not think Mike's right, Sarah's wrong. They would probably tend to favor you over me, and so sometimes you need that perspective. But I can't call like your friends to ask because your friends will also say Sarah's right, Mike's wrong. I think the moral of this little story is that everyone thinks I'm wrong, uh, even though I'm always right.
No.
But that's sorry. So I just wanted to give you my idea so that you could, my separate people
Yeah.
to that separate answers to that question.
Yeah. Um, I would probably talk to, my two best friends, um, or my sister, probably.
Yeah.
Um,
But as far as a couple that you model that you think is the ideal couple or the couple that you would like to be.
um, I don't know. I think that's one of my things is that I learned this early on. Like I would have like a mentor or a role model, and you try to like idolize, not idolize, but like they're the example to follow to your point. And I've
Yeah.
done that. Like, and I think it's mostly been like professionally, and then something could happen, along the way where maybe they're not as good as you thought they were, or they do something that you really don't agree with and they don't align with your values. And I think um, that causes like uh, more confusion on like what you really should do.
Yeah.
So I think, you can take bits and pieces from here and there. I think like one of my best friend's parents, they're really best friends. They love like being together. They go on their day trips together.
Yeah.
They have
They're
always seemed really happy.
yeah.
They've, I'm sure that they have things maybe that I don't know about that they fight about because I think everybody fights.
Yeah.
And I think if you're not fighting, there's also an issue because then you'll be like not caring about things that do bother you. Because I'm sure, if you're
Yeah.
just kind of like being complacent or coasting through, there's something going on bigger that you need to kind of like
Yeah.
look at. But yeah, I would say that was one thing I learned definitely very early 20s. I had someone that was like a manager who I was working with, and after, he was no longer there, he asked me to do something that I really wasn't comfortable with. And from then on, I think I learned that, like, nobody, really, no one's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say, I think we talked about this a few weeks ago, like, in my 20s, things, even when you're a kid, I think even more so, everything's just so like, this is right, this is wrong,
Yeah.
there's clear division on any particular issue that you're thinking about. And as you get into your 30s, I think if you're trying to look at a couple as your role model,
Yeah. I guess role
there can't
model's
be
not.
all good.
Yeah, role model isn't. I guess I don't mean it in like a you emulate them individual or them specifically, but you just think that they've figured it out mostly, kind of thing. Like, so
Yeah.
I have another couple example. I'm not going to say their names,
Okay.
but two of your friends that we really like that you were in their wedding, I think are a really great example of like the perfect supportive couple. Do you know who I'm talking about or no?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it was down here in North Carolina.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Um, and they're like I think a really great example of like supporting each other, just going on adventures together, like loving life together. And so I wouldn't emulate. I'm not trying to emulate when I say role model.
No,
I'm
no,
just
I don't
trying
think that either. Just
admiring in
like
a way that yeah,
qualities.
and then you say, "Oh, this is something I could learn from them."
Yeah.
Like,
But
and
I
not I
think,
can't learn from everything from anybody, but I can learn something from everybody. And that's kind of something that I think we should learn in every walk of life, not just marriage, but like you can learn from young people, old people, smart people, dumb people, good people, bad people. But I also think like when you see a couple that you really think are good together, you say, okay, well, what are they doing that's working? Am I doing something wrong? Or you just kind of like you're constantly. I think I mean a part of this whole idea of this podcast is like the concept of self examination and hopefully growth, self growth.
yeah.
And so I think like nothing's perfect, so therefore we can always get better. So that's how I look at it. Um,
I guess in the last few years, I think, um, as you get like more comfortable with yourself in your 30s and being who you are, you look more inward at how you can be better than looking outward.
yeah, that's true. Um, One thing I think is that always used to drive me nuts when before I met you, but also when I met you and we were newly dating and stuff, is I hate when people are, whether it's a couple or even of an individual, when people are assuming that because they've lived longer or they've been together longer that they have some secret you don't have. Best
Yeah.
example I can think of is Thomas the Tank Engine, and when he told us like we could come look at his house to see if it was something we might like someday. We call him Thomas. This is a former friend's ex-boyfriend who we got stuck on this like crappy double date with, and he was and we had been together. We were probably already engaged at that point,
You
I would
were already
assume.
living
Yeah,
in
we were definitely living
together.
together. I think we were engaged, and we call him Thomas the Tank Engine because his face is perfectly round. But he was like obnoxious, and he was 3 years older than me. He wasn't like 50 or 60 when I was 27 or 8.
Right.
Uh, and I just think about there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that with couples though too, where it's like, oh, we've been together 30, 40, 50, 60 years, so we're automatically better. And it's like, or you're more stubborn and or, like you decided, I feel like I've seen couples that have been together 5, 6 years that are great. And then you see couples that are together a long time and you're like, well, you're both miserable people, like, and you're stubborn. And so, like, I don't like the idea of just because you've been doing marriage longer or you've been living life longer that you think you're better. That's why, like,
Well, I think there's also like good spots and bad spots.
true,
And there's
yeah,
times where there's a lot of, maybe there's a lot of stress from work or stress from kids, stress from money.
yeah.
Those are like obviously the big three that, are usually putting pressure
Oh,
on
absolutely.
relationships. And I think,
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I'm
yeah,
not trying. I'm just. I remember when I was in college the first time. There was this guy. He had been with his girlfriend since they were like sophomores in high school, maybe. And he was an asshole, and she was like, he was an asshole, but he was also like fairly not misogynistic in the way like we think of, more in the like trad wife style. Like he wanted a trad wife, traditional wife, and he was just like real gross about it. And he would always talk down to everybody about, and it's like, yeah, but you started dating when you were 15, so like it doesn't count. I used to just say that to him, and it would piss him off, and I just remember being like, you're being a real dick, like
yeah.
just stop. And I feel like at every walk of every moment, so that was 19 years ago that I met that guy, and every 4 to 5 years since, I have met somebody who fills that role of just like, I've been doing this the longest, so fuck you. I'm awesome at this, and I just
Yeah.
hate that. And when it comes to relationships,
Yeah, I would agree. And
it's
then,
even
yeah.
more annoying. Like it's one thing you expect it, you just expect somebody who's older to think they know more about life, and there is some legitimacy, I guess, to that. But when it comes to relationship cockiness, it's so frustrating. So like I try not to do that to other people. Like
Oh,
when
definitely.
and I
You
think that
don't want to. You don't want to sound like that.
no.
And I don't think anyone can be an expert
Yeah.
because all that really matters is the two of you.
Yeah. I especially
And
don't want to be talking shit about how great our marriage is, and then you when you murder me, like we were talking about before, have people be like, "Oh, I guess it wasn't going that great." But I just think that like with marriage, it's so it's, well, not individualistic. It's individual to the couple. It's so specific. I told you about, there was an article years ago that I read that was talking about it was talking about, I can't remember if it was cheaters or polyamorous people in Hollywood. And the example that they used in this particular spot was Will Smith and Jada. And they said, they're talking about, they were referring to polyamory in this section of it. And then they said, uh, but one thing's for sure, there's definitely been cheating. And it's like, if they're polyamorous, they haven't been cheating. And I think that was the thing in my head where it clicked, where it was like, everybody has different rules. And that's like the idea of cheating is you're breaking the rules. And so like, if you're Kirk Cameron, you don't even kiss other women when you're acting, but other actors would think nothing of that as a
mhm.
thing. So like, it's just where you set your own rules. And I think that because in so many ways we as a society think like the way I do things is the right way, that marriage has become a huge version of that. And you and I have a pretty traditional marriage in a lot of ways, but
Yeah.
like not because we wanted to be traditional, just because it worked out like that
Yeah.
way.
And I think, there's sometimes a lot of pressure on like being a 50-50 household now
Yeah.
that like most families, both parents work or both spouses work.
Do we
Um,
consider ourselves a 50-50 household?
I think so, yeah.
I mean, I think that you're my sugar mama and I just work for play
Yeah.
money. That's what I've been telling everybody at work, and
That's
I
not
said it in front of
true.
your father,
Yeah.
and so I think that it's now officially on the record.
Yeah. I think you know, finance is probably its whole own thing with relationships. And I think that's something where it's just you got to be personally um comfortable with the situation.
Hmm.
I think, you know, for me something that was always important was not ever giving up my own financial freedom.
Right.
And same for you. Like,
Yeah, that's been fine. I mean, they say that the I think it's the number one thing that couples argue about is finances,
Yeah.
and I can feel that.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, ultimately,
Because it's,
until we get rich,
yeah.
like you're not like it is the number one factor in a lot of ways in your life. Just like if I wasn't if you and I weren't together, my finances would be a huge stressor for me, regardless of being with you or not being with you. Those are going to be an issue, and so it's that's part of why I think it is because it's something that it is a stressor, and then you've got two people trying to figure out how to do it, not just one person trying to figure out how to spend their money.
Yeah. And you always
But
want to be fair, but,
yeah,
and supportive of
yeah,
what both of you want to do. Like your Corvette, is an example of something that's not a necessity, but you can't live your life only ever focusing on necessities and no fun
right.
because it's just, it makes work like unenjoyable.
Yeah, I could definitely make the argument that my Corvette is a necessity.
Yeah,
It makes me feel alive. Uh,
exactly. That's
yeah.
my point.
Um, but I think. Do you have any last thoughts before we go to the final question that I've asked all my guests?
Sure. Um, just that, obviously we're not experts on this
Yeah,
topic.
I
And of
think.
course, we're still finding our way. I've heard, 7 years in is sometimes difficult, and I think statistically, I think like 15 years is also a big year where people maybe decide to like not be together anymore.
I
Um,
wonder. Sorry, I just want to. I have never heard that before. You just said that,
yeah,
but that kind of makes sense in a way that I wonder if it is people who stay together for their kids. Like, let's say
right.
you following a semi-traditional time frame, like what my parents did. So we'll say what I consider traditional. You get married. 2 years in, you have a first kid. Let's say 2 years in, you have, or 2 years after that, you have a second kid. So you're now 4 years down the road. So by the time you're hitting 15 years, your younger kid is 11, and the idea of getting having two separate households becomes like obviously it's always going to be there's going to be some version of trauma or mental health that needs to be focused on when it comes to children, but is the logistics of it are like, if for example you want to like put your kid on a plane, 13 and an 11-year-old, you can bring them right to the gate, you're not worried about
Yeah,
them. So like if getting, if you're divorced, if you're staying married for the kids, that becomes the first natural jumping off point, which is weird. Like, but I know at least one couple that waited until their kid was an adult to get divorced, and so I think that that is probably fairly common because people, they stay married for the kids. So I think to some extent that probably wears off once a kid hits a certain age.
yeah.
But
Not to just throw in another thought, but I think that's another thing that's super important is like you continue dating your spouse and you also don't make the kids really like number one.
yeah,
Like they're obviously a huge priority, but you have to like love each other first. And if you guys can,
yeah,
I think,
I half agree with you. I definitely agree on the dating your spouse, and I think we've done a great job with that. One fight that we got into when you were pregnant with Logan, and I think since then you've agreed with me, but like
yeah.
you when you were pregnant with Logan, you said, "Are you gonna love the baby more than you love me?" And I said, "Yeah." And you got really upset, and and probably partly hormonal
Maybe,
upset, I
yeah.
would guess. And and then you said how why or whatever, and I said because the baby, like my kid, there is no option that I can think of that my kid can do something where they shut off the love in me. Whereas there,
Yeah.
I now knowing you for as long as I know you, I would be 100% surprised if you didn't if I ever fell out of love with you because the things that would make that happen would be violence of some kind, and there is not any violence that I'm in you. I've literally never seen you be violent towards anything. um and I And it wouldn't be violence towards me, it would be violence towards somebody else, kids probably or whatever. But
Yeah.
so that was that's the one thing I it's not that I think in a lot of ways you have to prioritize your love for your
Yeah.
spouse, but as long as
I think there's just some. I think trap sometimes is like putting your kids in the front seat and your relationship's kind of more in the back
oh
seat.
yeah,
And like you do, you obviously you put your heart and soul into raising them and you do everything for them. But I think just being conscious that there is a balance there.
yeah,
Like your kids are eventually going to not like you when they're teenagers,
yeah,
and then they're gonna want to go out on their own,
yeah,
and
that's
then
true.
you guys are still together
Yeah,
after that.
yeah, I agree with that. I think I can picture in 10 to 15 years still liking me and me still liking you, but I think that there's going to be a huge period of time in there where Logan does not like one or both of us. And that so like that is a thing that you have to kind of get in touch with, is like the childhood, it's so phase
Yeah.
based, and marriage has I mean, I guess a marriage can have phases, but it's in a much smaller, less shifting way. It's more fluid than, I picture a 13-year-old dad, God, like,
Yeah. I mean, I think I knew that our son is 6, so I think I knew that, 6-year-olds like they kind of get that attitude, or they at least are testing their attitude and
yeah.
seeing what they can get away from with. And we're definitely starting to like see the little attitude, or like
Hmm.
like he jokes like that he's like he corrected me or whatever, something I said wrong, I said like a different name of a character, and he's like, "Oh, mom," like, and I'm like, "All right, like this is like a preview,
Yeah,
like
or I
already."
called I called the little yogurt smoothie this morning a yogurt, and you said, "Oh, don't say that in front of him. It's a smoothie."
Yeah.
But yeah,
And it's like, he's got to be cool at school, and he's got to put on
yeah,
that kind of vibe, I guess, now.
yeah. All right. So unless you have anything else, I have my last question, right?
Yeah.
So my last question for new listeners is, this is the question I ask all my guests, and it is to kind of get an idea of who our guest is, and that is, what joke or impression, what thing making fun of you in your life have you found the most amusing?
Well, this is like, I don't know. I think it's you do the impression, because that's, one thing I think is like I guess one of the things I like about our relationship is like we make each other laugh.
Yeah, and
And
we
so,
give each other a lot of shit in a fun way. Like
yeah.
when I asked you before we started recording today, I thought I knew what it was going to be, and because we were being lazy because we have the day off, and we were waiting to record, and I said, because Sarah and I used to have a podcast 3 years ago or
Yeah.
so, and we would record late at night because that's when Logan would go to sleep. So we were recording at like 11:30, and Sarah would lay down, and I'd have like the microphone aimed in front of her face, and I'd have to wake her up middle of the podcast. And so I kept joking that I was going to have to do that today, but I got her a stool. You'll see if you've looked on our Instagram account. By the time this goes up, there should be a picture of her in the stool. Um, but yeah, that's, to me, I thought that was going to be it because I was giving her so much crap about that.
But
But
it's actually a specific one that you do, and it's like, with me with my two best friends when we hang out, and it's like, "Oh, Sarah."
well, that's more an impression of them
I
because they
know.
always say that. But like my favorite is,
That's one of the ones I
I
think
guess,
of.
when,
Like you reading like the text
oh
messages
my
out
god,
loud when like cuz I say LOL a lot and they go haha. So like you'll read these in the car, like, and your sense of humor
oh
is like super dry, and like so you'll be like straight face and be like
yeah.
haha ha 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 ha. Like,
Yeah, I read it like a stenographer to her sometimes, so that she's not reading her texts while so she's driving. Sarah drives all the time. That's or most of the time in our
I love
relationship.
driving.
And so when her friends are having a conversation, in order for her to participate, sometimes I read the text so I can respond. And I read it as dry as humanly possible on purpose because it makes it so much more bizarre. Because it'll be like, I just got pumpkin spice lattes, haha, and then LOL, they're so good, that's amazing, LOL, haha.
And you'll like do like descriptive like
Yeah,
laughing crying emoji
yeah,
or heart eye emoji,
yeah,
which I don't know. I just find it super amusing. So it
yeah,
is kind of making fun of me, and
yeah, yeah.
but yeah,
So far, I'm trying to think, but I think most of the people that I've had on the podcast when I've asked this question, the joke has been something I've made fun of them for. I know it was with Adam.
yeah.
So
I think for the most part you're not mean about it because I am like
you're
pretty
saying,
sensitive. So I think you do it in a way that is like welcoming them in, and it's more in like a hey, let's be friends and have fun more than like
yeah.
straight up just
I'm pretty good at knowing people's limits. Like I know people don't think that, but as far as like giving, like I don't give crap to people who can't take crap.
yeah,
So
for the most part.
for the most part,
My dad a little bit. Like you love giving him crap, but
oh, but your dad,
he's like
your dad can dish
he
it
can
out, but he
dish
can't
it.
really take it.
Right.
So I'm trying to get him better at taking it.
Yeah.
But yes, I get, yeah, You-
Yeah.
yeah. All right. Do you have anything? I know you don't have anything to plug, but is there any parting thoughts or anything you'd like to say? It doesn't have to be on the topic of this episode. This is the spot where if you were another podcaster or creator, you would plug your thing, but
Yeah.
you're not. So
I would just say happy birthday because today is your birthday.
thank you.
Yeah.
That's how I got her on the podcast. This is my birthday present, getting her on the podcast.
Yep.
All right. So I'm going to say goodbye, everybody. And I would like if you would give us a review on whatever podcast app you're listening. And, obviously 5 stars is better. And if you subscribe, go back and listen to some of the other episodes. I think I've been getting some really good feedback from the people who are listening. And I think, it obviously helps every episode that you listen to. And so I will talk to you all next week on the next episode.